3 months ago, I lived in a $4.5 million house in the Green Lake area of Seattle, watching the lake turn silvery under the sun every morning. Today, I'm standing in the kitchen of a single-story house in a riverside town in Georgia, holding a letter that could shatter the entire set of memories I call my life. I'm Jordan Ellis, 45 years old. If you've ever thought you knew exactly who you are, stay, because what I'm about to say might be a mirror for you. I used to be a corporate risk assessor, the guy who spent all day calculating other people's losses and helping them rebuild their lives. I had everything Americans like to call the dream: a beautiful wife named Sloan, 2 kids, Avery, 15, who played basketball like the wind, and Nova, 13, who painted pictures that left the whole family silent. We had a wooden porch facing the lake bookshelves packed with Blue Jacket hardcovers, most of them gifts from my mother Miriam, a retired school nurse. But everything started splintering over 18 months. Sloane's phone began ringing out on the porch after dark. At dinners, she sat there as if she wasn't there at all. The house, warm with pine wood, slowly turned cold, like a cup forgotten in the freezer. Then one October morning, the doorbell rang at 7:30. The process server said, "Mr. Ellis, these are papers." I opened the envelope and read words like bullets, divorce, gambling addiction, financial fraud, unfit for custody, bank statements in my name that looked alien, casino receipts from places I'd never set foot in, statements from neighbors I'd only ever greeted at the door. None of it was true. Not a single thing. If you've ever had a hat shoved onto your head that wasn't yours, you'll know the feeling the world tilts and you no longer know where the ground is. And in that very moment, one grain of sand, a letter from my mother, began to turn the wheel of fate in a direction I never expected. Let me pull you back to when everything still breathed evenly. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, the only son of Miriam, a woman who had the habit of jotting notes in purple ink on the margins of books and remembering half the neighborhood's birthdays. She taught me that life's order comes from knowing exactly what day to pay bills, how much to save, when to speak less, so you can listen more. I met Sloan when I was 17 and she was 16. Young love tends to magnify everything by 10. A bubble tea date becomes a gala. The high school court looks like Madison Square Garden. Sloan later went into real estate, shrewd sharp. She walked into a room as if the lights had to shift for her. We built the dream house through promotions, a long-term loan, and late nights working numbers at the kitchen table. Avery was as tall as a hoop post, size 13 sneakers stamped across our living room floor. College coaches were emailing since he was only a sophomore. Nova lived on the opposite shore of the world where everything is told in color. Some days, I'd come home to find a lake painting hung up, its light rendered with white pencil strokes as fine as hair. I had no idea how she did it. Amid that setting, I told myself my story: Jordan Ellis, family man, dependable assessor, the Georgia kid who made it in Seattle. There was no reason to doubt that portrait. Who doubts a painting you made yourself? Until small details stopped aligning: the porch phone calls, the work schedule, stretching to midnight, the unfamiliar look on the face of the person beside you for 20 years. You know that odd feeling when a framed picture hangs 1 degree off. At first, no one cares. Then suddenly the whole room looks wrong. Breakups rarely start loud. They usually begin with very small sounds. The deadbolt turning at 10:30. Hesitant steps on the stairs. And "I'm fine," said too quickly. Sloan took calls on the back porch, voice lowered. At dinners, she said VIP clients needed late showings. I believed her, because believing is a habit of those who've lived long in happiness. The kids reacted in age-appropriate ways. Avery asked, Why does Mom always seem mad at someone? Nova started drawing smiling families with each person standing in a different corner, a blank space in the middle. I invited Sloane to the restaurant she'd loved back in college, the one with a timber roof and golden lights like nostalgia. She nodded, came, ate, laughed. But as we left, I saw the smile slip off and stay behind like a napkin forgotten on the table. I tried everything: marriage counseling, weekend getaways, books on how to speak so loved ones will listen. The tighter I pulled, the more the cord screeched. One night I asked directly, "Is there something you need that I'm not seeing?" She was silent for a long time, then said, "Some things don't need to be said." If this were an ordinary story, we would have found the leak, patched it, and kept living. But this wasn't ordinary, because 10 weeks later, the process server stood at our door, and behind him was a pipeline that had already been opened, banks, casinos, witnesses. Everything fit together as if someone had rehearsed for months. In that thick packet, I saw the worst version of myself, a version I had never been. Online betting statements tagged with my name. Hotel receipts from Reno and Vegas signed Jordan Ellis in handwriting so similar my wrist trembled. A coworker's statement claiming I placed bets on lunch breaks. Sloane's attorney, a woman in Navy, read every line as calmly as a weather report. My attorney, a decent guy who usually drafted contracts, looked at me for a long time. "If there's anything you haven't told me, say it now so we can salvage something." I swore on my kids' names there wasn't, but the truth had no witnesses, and they had a system of evidence. Court wasn't like the movies. A white cold room, old wooden benches, a judge peering through glasses like looking through a winter. They painted a man with 2 lives, an addict siphoning his family, including 2 children. I lost. They awarded Sloane the house custody, most assets. I got a thin visitation schedule stamped with gambling treatment counseling like a red seal on my forehead. In the parking lot, Sloane walked over, lips slightly curved, not happy, just a strange shape. "You won't be seeing Avery and Nova anymore. I'm moving the kids to Portland next month. You don't have the money to push back." That sentence didn't just block the road. It hinted that long ago someone had already calculated my finances. 6 weeks later, I lost my professional license for ethical violations. Accounts drained. I stuffed the rest of my life into the trunk of an old pickup and headed back to my mother's house in Georgia, a house empty since she died. I thought it was a refuge. Turns out it was the real beginning of the story. The town of Eden Ferry has no skyline, only a river, great oaks, and the smell of damp grass. My mother's house was small, neat wood-paneled from the 60s. Her reading glasses still lay on the side table by the armchair. In the kitchen, a ceramic mug bore a crack like lightning in a summer sky. Everything stood still since the funeral. The first week I did nothing but wake up, then lie down again. Depression has a smell, the metallic tang of old tap water and T-shirts that never saw the sun. I stared at the ceiling, stain a time track of rainy seasons, and thought of the kids. Did Avery hate me? Did Nova believe her dad stole money? What was Sloane saying about me? Then one morning I heard my mother's voice in my head. Problems don't disappear. You have to touch them. I looked around. The only asset left was this house. If I wanted my kids back, I needed money. To get money, the house had to be made pretty to sell. I hauled out sandpaper, paint ladder. Fresh paint slowly pushed out the stale smell. Using my hands, planing, brushing, nailing quieted my mind. Eventually, I went to the basement. Mom had used it as storage: Christmas tubs, old photo albums, the model plane I abandoned in 7th grade. I sorted everything like the old assessor returning to work, until I noticed something odd. The furnace area didn't match the other corners. Fine dust traced arcs as if something heavy had been dragged. Short parallel scratches marred the concrete. and on the furnace, fresh metal scuffs. My mother had been gone 2 years. She was 5'3", struggled to carry a market basket. Who moved the furnace, and why? The question stood there like a nail in the floor. I decided to pull it out. You'd be surprised what ordinary people can do when pressed to the wall. I carefully shut off the gas valve, disconnected the pipe, patted a lever with wood, used a car jack, and, inch by inch pushed, my back burned. The furnace slid from its spot like a sleeping whale being roused. Behind it was a safe bolted into the wall, painted the same gray as the basement amateur camouflage, effective nonetheless. A dial from 099. I smirked 10,000 combinations. Then I remembered my mother's odd ritual. Every birthday she called me at 07:12 on the dot, saying it was when I first cried. 07:12. My hand trembled as I turned the dial right. 07 left, 12. Right year of birth. Click. The heavy door released with a weary sigh. Inside money. Bundles of hundreds bound with rubber bands, some yellowed, some still smelling of ink. I counted by professional instinct, nearly $820,000. Beneath the cash were documents, driver's licenses with my mother's photo, but different names: Isabel Rios, Cara Wells, Monique Hart. Social security cards, birth certificates, a passport stamped 1989. Everything looked legit to a frightening degree. At the bottom, an envelope read, "For Jordan." My mother's purple script, the J-tail curled like a musical note. I sat on the concrete and opened it slowly. The first line knocked my heart from its cage. My beloved son. If you're reading this, it means they've found you, and I'm no longer here to shield you. Then came the sentences that upended my life. Your real name is Jordan Navarro. Your father, Victor Navarro, didn't die in an accident. He was murdered by an organization called the Ravenwood Syndicate in Chicago in 1990. 3 months later, I testified before a grand jury. Early 1991, we entered the Witness Protection Program. All the pieces suddenly fit. Why Mom always had just enough. Why she avoided the past. Why she taught me not to tell strangers too much about myself. She didn't just teach me to live, she kept me alive. The letter continued in her calm, familiar tone, like when she told me to store winter coats. The money in the safe is what remains of the initial support plus what I saved. But there's something I learned too late. 3 years ago, people began asking about the Navarros. I hired private investigators to keep an eye on you in Seattle. They reported what broke my heart. Sloan unwittingly worked with those hunting us. They found you first, then used her to get close. I stopped reading. The basement spun. Sloan, the girl I loved since 17. Mom wrote on, not blaming, just telling. I don't know how much Sloan understood, but the forged files, the witnesses, everything was meant to break you financially and mentally, forcing you back to Georgia where they guessed I might have left something. Son, don't touch anything else. Call Deputy U.S. Marshal Alana Reeves. She's been waiting for this call since I died. The phone number was written in red ink, underlined 3 times. At the end, a line that made me both cry and stand tall. You're stronger than you think. Use the money wisely. Get your children back. Sometimes the worst things open the right doors. I sat still for a long time. When you've lost everything, a new truth can be a knife or a key. I chose to see it as a key. I picked up the phone and dialed. Reeves. This is Jordan Ellis. Maybe Jordan Navarro. I'm sitting in front of my mother's safe. A beat of silence. Where are you, Eden Ferry, Georgia? Do not leave the house. Do not call anyone. We'll be there in 4 hours. Alana Reeves arrived with 2 other deputies as the afternoon sun dipped. Tall, salt and pepper hair tied low, the look of someone who'd seen too much evil but refused to harden into stone. They set up cameras, sealed envelopes photographed every paper edge. When done, we sat around the kitchen table where my mother used to spread peanut butter on bread. Reeves said, "Your mother was brave. She knew they'd come for you one day, so she designed everything so you could unlock it yourself, the money, the code as your birth time, even the private investigator net. Then she laid out the big picture Ravenwood isn't as clumsy as in the 90s. Instead of public violence, they destroy victims through law-fabricated financials, bought testimony, pulling loved ones in, and pressing the button. The target spirals, isolates, and if lucky enough to live, returns to roots. There they wait. They've used this script at least 6 times in 15 years, Reeves said. Sloan isn't the mastermind. Most likely she was approached as a lucrative client, then repurposed gradually. Anger and fear are perfect conductors for manipulators. I asked what I feared most. The kids. We've secured surveillance on the group assisting Sloan, she said. And Jordan, your mother died of natural causes. But since then we've planted flags around here. Anyone wandering off hours was recorded. The next morning, Reeves's phone buzzed. She nodded at me, Portland. 6 a.m. Sloan and 3 men with her are in custody. She thought they were private investigators protecting her interests. That news didn't make me gloat. It made me lighter. Like when a test result rules out cancer, you're not healed yet, but at least you know the right disease. Reeves set her hand on the file. Now it's our turn to retell the story. With the truth. The next morning, I sat in my mother's living room where sunlight slipped through old curtains onto a blotched beige wall. On the wooden table, Reeves spread a series of documents and photos. The print was smudged, but the faces were sharp as a knife. In the center was Sloan, familiar brown waves of hair sitting in a Portland cafe. Beside her were 2 men in gray suits, gestures, sure eyes cold. Reeves pointed. These are Derek Holt and Ramon Vega. On paper, financial advisors. In federal files, both are operatives of the Ravenwood syndicate. My chest tightened. The casino invoices, fake bank statements, witness testimonies. All traced back to these men. Reeves said, "Steady, Jordan. The picture is complete. Your wife didn't orchestrate this herself. She was drawn in believing they were helping with the divorce. In reality, she was the gateway for Ravenwood to destroy you." I stared at the photo. Sloan's smile looked forced, as if she were trying to convince herself to believe the sweet talk. I felt both hurt and angry. 25 years building life brick by brick, and there she was beside those who wanted to erase me. However much my mind knew she'd been manipulated, my heart felt the betrayal like a slow-turning blade. Reeves' laced her fingers met my eyes. This gives you a chance. If Sloan cooperates, her testimony will be gold to take Ravenwood to court. But prepare yourself, the old trust will never be whole again. I was silent. My mind flashed to our early days, Sloan at 16 under a red umbrella, radiant smile. That image collided with the one on the table where she sat between 2 gray-suited men. One side memory, one side harsh truth. And I knew that from this moment, not only was Ravenwood unmasked, I had to face the truth that the person I loved most had become a piece in the plan to destroy me. 2 days later, under Marshals' supervision, I was first allowed to call Avery and Nova. I sat in the small living room in Eden Ferry, a black landline connected through a secure line. The fluorescent light above flickered, making the room feel like an interrogation chamber rather than a home. 3 rings. Avery's voice came through hoarse and off-key, nothing like the 6'3" kid who laughed loud on the court. "Dad, Mom got arrested. People say you cheated, you're in debt. Is it true?" I closed my eyes, knuckles white. "No, son. I've never gambled, never stolen $1. Some people fabricated everything to destroy our family. And Mom? Mom was used by them. Silence. I heard his heavy breathing. Then Nova cut in voice, trembling as if trying to sketch with words the messy lines in her head. Mom said, "You abandoned us, that you chose money over family." The sentence pierced my heart like a cold needle. I inhaled, found my voice. "Never, Nova. Even if the whole world turns its back, I'll run toward you. Everything I do isn't to keep money, it's to keep you too." A small sob. Then Avery whispered faint like in an empty locker room, "Dad, I want to believe you. But everyone around me says otherwise." In that moment, I realized being cleared in court wasn't enough. I had to win back my children's hearts and trust. Otherwise, even if Ravenwood fell victory would be hollow. The call ended with a short beep. I sat still, hand on the receiver. Reeves stepped in, set a hand on my shoulder. "You've planted the seed. For the kids to see the truth, it takes time. And consistent action. Don't be afraid, Jordan. They'll remember their real father." I understood then the next battle wasn't only in a courtroom, but in Avery's and Nova's hearts. And that would be the hardest conversation of my life, spoken not just with words, but with every step I took from now on. Time drifted like a looped heavy track. For 6 months, I lived with stacks of files and federal agents. Each day, Reeves or a colleague brought another piece. It started as a few clumsy doctored emails, then grew into a sophisticated forgery machine, bank statements, casino receipts, even witnesses paid in cash. One rainy afternoon, I sat before a long table at the Marshals' office staring at a sealed packet. A red stamp on the cover read, "Exhibit A, Forgery." Reeves slid it to me, calm-eyed Jordan. "These are the forensic results. Every signature is fake. Ink and paper don't match the issue dates. We traced the payment accounts, they all lead to Ravenwood." My hand shook as I took it, feeling as if my honor had been returned in black and white. But joy didn't rise. The old trial surged back, the judge's doubtful gaze, Sloane's cold smile, Avery's and Nova's bewildered eyes. I murmured, "If justice needs this much proof to listen, then truth is fragile." The system began to respond. The licensing board sent a formal apology reinstating my credential. Local papers ran the front page, "Assessor framed in crime organization plot." My eyes blurred reading it. Not pride release, because I knew that for that headline my mother had kept silent 35 years and I had paid in family loss. That evening I called Avery again. I read the article to him, my voice still shaking. "Son, they finally recognized I'm innocent." On the other end, quiet, then a long exhale. I needed nothing else. It was enough to know a door had cracked open in his heart. In that moment, I realized exoneration isn't only paperwork. It's re-sowing trust in the memories of those you love. And on that road, I'd only just taken the first steps. I didn't see Sloane again in a courtroom hallway, but in a family therapy room arranged by the Marshals. Small room, gray ash sofa, a plastic flower arrangement in the corner that would never wilt. I walked in to find Sloane with head bowed, fingers tightly interlaced. The sharp aura of a successful broker was gone. Only a woman who'd lost her bearings remained. She looked up, tired eyes rimmed red. "Jordan, I didn't know everything. They showed me evidence, said you cheated, said if I cooperated, the kids would be safe. I believed them." Her voice shook broken as if she couldn't forgive herself. I sighed. "What I need isn't an apology. It's the truth from you so Avery and Nova understand their father isn't a sinner. We agreed to attend therapy with the kids." Sitting together for the first time after everything, the four of us were silent a long while. Avery folded his arms, wary-eyed. Nova doodled jagged lines. The therapist prodded gently. "Who wants to start?" I turned to them. I was set up. The worst part wasn't losing the house or the job. It was seeing you believe I was a liar. Avery looked down, tapping a rhythm on his knee. Nova put her pencil down and whispered, "I just want us to sit together like before." Sloane Teary placed a hand on Nova's shoulder. "I was wrong. I let fear lead me. But I promise I'll help Dad bring you back into the light." From that day, we laid new bricks, patiently brief shared meals, regular sessions, phone calls without hesitation. Avery returned to the team, and for the first time in months, I heard his laughter in the living room. Nova hung a new painting, a small house standing in a storm, and above it the sky opened a slit of light. Looking at that painting, I knew our family wasn't perfect, but at least we were stitching it back together with truth, trust, and hope. One winter morning, I returned to my mother's old house in Eden Ferry, now empty and lined with time. The kitchen still carried the scent of old wood, the bookshelf held her favorites, but in the basement her real legacy shadowed me every day. The Marshals had sealed everything, but they let me keep a small box inside was a dark brown leather journal, edges worn. On the first page, her familiar hand read, "If one day my son reads these lines, remember that secrets aren't meant to divide but to protect." I devoured each page like breaths of my mother. She documented our life in witness protection, the sudden night moves, coded phrases on calls, suspicious looks on the street she had to ignore. I understood that her thrift, the just enough I'd chalked up to frugality, was actually stockpiling for storm days. At the end she wrote, "You won't grasp this burden until you're a father yourself. But don't let fear imprison you. Let it teach you to cherish quiet moments." I closed the journal and sat a long time in the cold basement. Outside, Avery and Nova were waiting for practice and art class. They didn't know their grandmother had mapped the road 30 years ago so her grandkids could grow up safe. I decided to turn that legacy into action, use part of the safe money to found a scholarship in Miriam Hale's name for children whose parents sacrifice for justice. I wanted Miriam remembered not as a fleeing witness, but as a mother who made her life a shield for her son. When Avery signed the foundation papers with me, he looked up and smiled. "Dad, Grandma would be so proud." I nodded, feeling for the first time in years my heart lighten. A year later, when the Ravenwood case went to trial, I stood in a federal courtroom in Chicago, the very city where my father fell in the shadows of hatred. Dozens of defendants sat silent behind long tables, fluorescent lights making the room both glaring and cold. Called to testify, I inhaled, looked around, and began. No longer the voice of a victim, but of a man carrying on his mother's legacy. I recounted each plot, each forged exhibit, each tear my children shed believing their father had betrayed them. I spoke of Miriam, a single mother, a silent witness, a woman who paid with her whole life to shield her son. When I stopped, I saw Avery's eyes bright and Nova nodding as if completing the final sketch of our family story. The judge's gavel struck. Ravenwood and accomplices were convicted. The wood's crack boomed, taking me back to that first rainy night when everything began to collapse. But this time I didn't bow. I stood straight as if my mother held my hand, whispering, "Son, we're done." Outside, snow fell white. My kids and I stepped out of the courthouse into a freezing sky and a strangely warm heart. We knew healing would still be long. Sloane needed therapy. Avery wrestled with trust. Nova still painted in darker tones. But at least the family portrait now had a bright border. And I realize sometimes the worst thing is the door to truth, to family, and to a strength you didn't know you had. If this story touched you, leave a comment about a time someone in your family protected you in a way you only understood years later. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to hear more stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary adversity. Because sometimes the quietest battles leave the loudest legacies.